Okay, so I'd like to start by just expressing my gratitude, really. First of all, to Almighty God for making it possible for this whole thing to happen. And also to the ladies and gentlemen, the brothers and the sisters who put a lot of effort and time and gave a lot up to be able to organize this event. And last but by no means least, to everybody who came here to listen to me, to listen to me speak today. I really do appreciate it. It's my first time in Malaysia, and so far it's been a fantastic experience. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. So was Timothy brainwashed? First of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Tim. I haven't been called Timothy since I was very young. My mum named me Timothy and then promptly decided she didn't like it. It's a strange thing to do for a parent. But she named me Timothy and then promptly decided she didn't like it and she preferred Tim. Actually, she wanted to name me Michael, but her best friend had given birth just a little earlier and named her son Michael, so she felt I should choose another name, so she named me Timothy Michael. So that's how the name came to be. But I prefer Tim. I prefer to shorten it. It's a difficult question to answer. In fact, it's a very difficult question for me to answer the topic of today subjectively. How do you subjectively answer whether you are brainwashed or not? It's very, very difficult to do. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave that to you guys to decide. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself, how I came to be here dressed like this, standing in front of you, talking to you about Islam, and about my journey and about how I ended up here. And I think I'll leave it for you guys to decide what the influences on that were. And on that topic, I think generally it's safe to say that not everyone in the room is going to agree with what I have to say today. And I think that's perfectly normal and something totally usual. And we having given a lot of lectures, I've actually given a lecture in Nottingham University in the UK, the sister institution or that you guys are in. And from all of these lectures, my experience is that we're going to have areas, we're going to have points where maybe we might not agree, but we can at least agree to respect one another and share opinions and comments. And definitely I want to hear from you guys at the end of the lecture. We won't take any questions during the lecture, but once I've finished talking and saying what I have to say, I'll be more than willing to listen to what you guys have to say as well. So that being said, I'll start at the very, very beginning. I already started at my birth. Obviously, I was born. My mom named me Timothy, so we've got that far. And now the next point comes as to sort of, summarizing the most relevant points, because it's difficult to fit 33 years of your life into an hour of a lecture or an hour of a speech. But what I will try to do is I'll try to select for you the things that I think are significant. But I'm going to give you a disclaimer before I begin. And the disclaimer is that the events that I'm talking about were a very, very, very long time ago. Again, relatively so anyway. I was 14 years old. I'm going to talk to you about when I was 8 years old, when I was 10 years old, when I was 12 years old. So we're talking about, getting on for 20 years ago. So that being said, I will do my best to convey to you as accurately as I can what happened. But I will give a disclaimer that even the memories that we have of events that happen are still subjective. It's still subject to how I remember it being. And I think that's only fair to say. And in Islam, we're always commanded to be fair, to be just in what we say. So it's fair to say that I will tell you as best I remember, and whatever of the details I've forgotten or convinced myself were different, I'll leave for you guys to decide about that. So I'll tell you a little bit about the environment that I was brought up in. So I was born near to Newcastle upon Tyne. Actually, I wasn't born in Newcastle upon Tyne in the United Kingdom, but I was born not so far away. I moved to Newcastle when I was 6 years old because of my dad's job. And I'll tell you a little bit about my family background. So we're a bit of a mixed family. primarily most of us were brought up as Protestant Church of England Christians, at least by name. I don't think it's really fair to say that we were brought up as devout Christians. I don't think that's fair to say, and I think that would be unfair on Christianity for me to give you that impression that I was brought up as a really devout Christian, praying in church every Sunday and so on. That wasn't the case. I was brought up as nominally by name as a Christian. My mom, she came from the background of being a Jehovah's Witness, but that wasn't through her choice. Actually, my grandfather converted to become a Jehovah's Witness from being a Church of England Protestant Christian. He converted to become a Jehovah's Witness because of an event that happened to him when he became very scared. Something very scary happened to him, and there was a guy at work who was a Jehovah's Witness, and he said to him, well, I think you should think more about God and you should convert. So I always tell them I wasn't the first person in my family to convert. Even though I might have been the first one in my family to convert to Islam, but I wasn't the first person in my family to convert. My grandfather, the first person that I know of, converted to be a Jehovah's Witness. So still within Christianity, but a very different set of beliefs from what many Christians believe. It's quite different. My mom was kind of forced to believe in that. She used to kind of, like for example, I'll give you an example. Many Jehovah's Witnesses don't celebrate Christmas. And my mom and my grandmother would, celebrate Christmas secretly, without telling my grandfather, because I'll give him one thing, I think maybe I took this habit from him, that when he became a Jehovah's Witness, he became a Jehovah's Witness, he didn't take it half. He followed down to the dot. In fact, to a certain extent, that sort of was a factor in when he passed away, because he passed away from a kind of cancer. I believe he had a kind of cancer of the lymph nodes or something like that in his body, and he was told that he needed a blood transfusion. And any one of you who knows about Jehovah's Witnesses will know that the mainstream belief within Jehovah's Witnesses is that you can't receive blood. You can't have a blood transfusion. And he refused that. I'm not sure that would have made a big impact on whether he lived or died, but in the perception of my mum and dad, well, in the perception of my mum at least, that was a feeling that it contributed. And so they rebelled very strongly against the witnesses when my grandfather passed away. And my mum really went back to completely vanilla Protestant Church of England Christianity, and totally went away from all that stuff. Another interesting thing is that my mom actually used to give lectures as part of the witnesses. So, I tell them, when they complain about if they have anything to say about me, I say, I'm only following what you guys did, My grandfather converted and my mom used to give lectures. So what can I do? My mum went back to sort of the vanilla Protestant Church of England Christianity, plain and simple. Also within my family members on my father's side are those who converted to Catholicism. Now, again, I don't really want to speak for Christianity. It's probably not fair of me as a Muslim to speak on behalf of Christianity. But there is usually a conversion process that you go through between Protestantism and Catholicism. You have to convert. You have to take some lessons and convert. So my grandmother's sister on my father's side, she converted because she married a Catholic man. And at that time, the Catholic Church taught that you can't marry a Catholic man or woman cannot marry a Protestant man or woman, and instead they have to convert. So she converted. It was a big, I actually think she probably went through more converting to Catholicism than I did converting to Islam, because that for them at their time was a big thing. It was a big thing, and she converted. Likewise, my cousin also converted, married a Catholic girl, and converted to Catholicism as well. He did his study that he had to do, set number of days, and then he announced that he had converted. He went through the process of converting and becoming a Catholic. All of this is within Christianity. None of them stopped being Christian, but they made big changes. And for those of you who know, especially sometimes when there are tensions between Protestants and Catholics, that can be a big thing. That can be a pretty big thing when somebody does that. So for them, that was how they were. By the time I was aware of religion as an idea, I don't remember going to church except for weddings, funerals, and the likes. I don't remember ever going to church for anything other than that. I don't really remember sort of being a regular churchgoer. I probably couldn't have told you where my local church was. At least that was how I was brought up. But one thing I will say, and I think it is relevant to the story, is that I did believe in God. And I'm not to say that I believed correctly, or what I now believe to be correctly, in God, but I did believe in a God, that there was a creator of the heavens and the earth. I would not have identified myself as either atheist or agnostic. If someone had asked me, and like now, I think the standard reply in England that I get when I ask most people, even when I ask my parents, is they kind of almost put themselves across as being agnostic Christians. Like, we're Christian, but we don't really, we don't really know what's going on. We're Christian and we're happy with that, but there's no great faith in that sense. It's kind of a very almost semi-agnostic Christianity. And I wasn't like that. I remember very firmly believing in a God. I remember praying. I don't think, like, for example, if I really got myself in big trouble, which is usually the case, and I did that a lot when I was younger, when I got myself in big trouble, I remember praying to God and saying, God, get me out of this. I'm stuck. Help me out. I don't remember that God being Jesus as such, or being any other form, name, concept, whatever. I just remember praying to God with a capital G. I don't remember that being a concept of me believing that God to be, or Jesus to be a part of that God, or anything like that. I just believed in God as a concept. And if anyone had asked me, I would have said I'm Christian, of course. That's what I was brought up to say. I was baptized, or whatever it is that they christened. I think the word is the right word to use for a Protestant Christian. I was christened. I was brought into Christianity. So I would have said I'm a Christian. And I believe in God. But it wasn't a big part of my life. And I think that's fairly true for a lot of young people. It's very rare, among young people, that religion plays a big part in their life. And it didn't for me. It would be wrong for me to say that I was deeply engaged in religion and that's how I became a Muslim. If anything, probably I became a Muslim because I wasn't deeply engaged in religion. So where was the first time that I started thinking about religion? To the best of my knowledge, it was around about what we call in England year 8, or grade 8, or whatever. So I would have been 12, 11, 12 maybe, 12, something like that. And around that time, we had a teacher who was, you get those teachers who are just really memorable. And until this day, I remember him. He's a fairly old man with a ponytail. And, and he wore very, strange clothes for us, like cowboy boots, and he would wear strange things with little, tassels hanging off. And he was a very, very funny guy and very nice. And he really engaged me in thinking about religion. He never taught Islam to the best of my knowledge. I don't remember ever hearing the word Islam from him. But he did talk to us about Sikhism, Hinduism, Judaism, which was different for us because for me, you're brought up basically, with the blinders on, believing that there's, everyone is just like you and believes the same just like you. And then seeing people of other faiths, and I believe at that time he took us through some of the Eastern, traditionally Eastern faiths like Hinduism and Buddhism and things like that. And that really, sort of opened my mind. But I didn't listen to him and think, I know I need to become a Hindu or a Buddhist, or I need to change my religion, or I need to become a Christian, or I need to start going to church. I was just interested in the concept that other people might have different beliefs to me. And I found it fascinating. He was a very engaging teacher. In fact, if you listen to my story all the way through, you might conclude that I was brainwashed by a lot of non-Muslims into becoming Muslim. I certainly don't remember a Muslim ever telling me to become a Muslim or even telling me anything about Islam. Everything I learned about Islam, as you're going to hear, is all from people who weren't Muslim. So I do believe there's a potential that I was brainwashed by non-Muslims into becoming Muslim. That's possible. So my RE teacher, this is the first guy who really opens my mind up to religion. And at that time, I was going through, you could say, I don't know, I'll put it in a nice way, a formative phase of my life. I could put it in a not nice way and say that I was getting myself into trouble. I was academically doing very well. But there's a thing about young people and rebellion, right? Like this is, we love to rebel against the system, and I was doing very, very well academically. I was in the top groups in my class, but I liked to get myself into a lot of trouble. And I took great pride in being the most naughty, the most disruptive, the most, pain in the neck student that you could possibly have. And then going and getting good grades, because that made it worse for them. Like if I got bad grades, they can blame and say he's a delinquent, he's disruptive, he doesn't listen, and he's got terrible grades. But I used to very much enjoy, skipping class and then coming and getting a good grade in the exam, so that the teacher would get very, very frustrated. And this is not a good thing. That's not something to be proud of, but that's just how I was. I was going through a very rebellious kind of a very difficult phase. And definitely the relationship between me and my parents wasn't great. I remember, for example, I had no interest in smoking, for example. I had absolutely no interest in smoking. If someone offered me a cigarette, I wouldn't have taken it. But I remember bringing a packet of cigarettes home in my pocket in order to just wind up my parents. For my parents to find it, so that then my parents could say, "Oh my God, you're smoking, this is terrible," and make a big scene out of it. And that was the kind of thing that I had a bad relationship with them, where I was struggling to find my place. I guess if I'm going to be nice to myself, which is probably quite a good thing, because I don't know if you guys are going to be nice to me at the end. So if I'm being nice to myself, I could probably say that I was struggling to find out who I was. And I didn't have very great friends. I didn't, in that time, that age, at about 11, 12, I wouldn't say I had really bad friends, but they were definitely not helping. And one of the things I noticed about my friends is, they would encourage this kind of behavior, because look, people do. They would encourage this kind of bad behavior, and they knew it wasn't, everyone knew it wasn't in my character. Like, I knew myself that this isn't me. This is not who I am. But at the time, it seemed like fun. And they would encourage it. And it got so bad that one day I decided to run away from home. But I really planned it out. I managed to get from Newcastle to York, and that's pretty far. That's about 100 miles. That's about 150 kilometers, something like that. It's not a short distance. I managed to get 100, 150 kilometers away. It's pretty distant. At the age of 12. Yeah, roughly at the age of 12. And of course, my parents were devastated. They were really upset, and I got badly grounded afterwards. And then when I got badly grounded, that led to something else that I used to like to do, which is I'm still today an avid reader. I was never one to sit in front of the television. I'm going to make my first controversial statement of the night. I'm going to limit myself, that I don't think television does anything for you, to be honest with you. I think television generally dumbs people down, and it's not, nobody became intelligent watching television. That's my personal thoughts. And I used to love to read. I used to read and read and read and read and read. And especially when I was grounded, I used to read a lot. And perhaps, because I'm really, when I answer this question about whether I was brainwashed, I'm really trying to be genuine. I'm really trying to answer it as sincerely as I can. It's not my intention to, that I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 points, and the end answer should be no. That's not what I'm exploring the topic, just like you came to listen to me explore the topic, So maybe there's a possibility that I was influenced by what I read. I don't think I read any books about Islam, not that I remember, but definitely I read novels. And in novels, you get people who pray, people who believe in God, nuns and monks and, Buddhists and people of all different religions, and atheists also, and agnostics, and you get people questioning God, and you get all sorts of things. And it did interest me. I did read it and think, I wonder if they're any more right than we are. Because different people have different ideas. Some people have the idea that all religion is just a waste of time. And it doesn't matter what religion you are. Like some people have a particular special hatred for a particular religion. Like some people have a real special hatred that they reserve just for Islam. But generally, a lot of people will say to you that, in all honesty, look, religion is religion. I might think that Christianity is that little bit better, but to be honest, religion is religion. And for a while, I went through that belief. I was very much of the belief that religion is there to control people. Religion is there to manipulate people, brainwash people. And that, to be honest, they're all kind of similar. Like they may have varying beliefs. Like for one of them, God may be in heaven. For one of them, God may be on the earth. For one of them, God may be a statue. For one, God may be an animal. But they kind of go along the same lines of telling you do this and don't do this. This is not allowed and this you should do. And at that time, I was definitely not interested in anyone telling me what to do and what not to do. And definitely not a religion. I did not want to be told what to do and what not to do. I would like to argue the point that maybe the reason why I was like that might have been because I didn't find those religions that I had exposure to make a lot of sense. I was very cynical. And again, that's not me, saying anything negative about them, just personally how I felt. I felt that they didn't make sense, and I felt very cynical about them. I read the history of the Christian church in medieval times, in the Middle Ages. And, that didn't leave me with a great deal of faith. It didn't leave me thinking, oh, wow, what a wonderful history of being so nice to everybody and being just like Jesus was and sharing faith with everybody. And if someone slaps you, show them the other cheek. It was a lot of killing, a lot of slaughter, a lot of manipulating people, and a lot of gathering wealth, and a lot of sort of horrible things. And that doesn't reflect Christianity. That's not what Jesus was, and that's not what Christianity is, and that's not who Christians are. But I read that and kind of felt, yeah, okay, religion is just religion. I believe in God, but I don't believe in religion. I got that far. I believe in God, but I don't believe in religion, which is a very strange thing to say, because if you believe in God, presumably you believe that God gave you some sort of instruction of what you should do next. Step 1, believe in God. Step 2, there should be something there, some sort of thing, even if it's vague. Step 2, be nice to everyone, okay, but there should be something. Something should be there. But I just kind of got to step 1, and that was it. Believe in God, but no real, if you like, religious doctrine, and not really impressed by any world religion that I heard of that made me think, okay, this is amazing. It's all the same. I then moved school at about the age of 13. We moved from what was then my middle school unto my high school. And I was so it's from year 8 to year 9, or grade 8 to grade 9, we moved school. When I moved school, I think that I aimed to make a lot of changes. I realized that my friends were getting me into a lot of trouble and things were getting more serious. And that tends to be the case, right? You see 12-year-olds getting into trouble, and 12-year-olds get into trouble, right? But there's a limit to the trouble they get into. You see 15, 16-year-olds getting into trouble, and it's like, okay, now it gets a bit serious. So I saw things getting more serious for me. I saw things to be getting more serious, and that my friends were they were doing stuff that was getting me in trouble. I got arrested a couple of times, and not for anything major, but things were not going the right way. And I kind of realized that, okay, I need to seriously make some changes. So new school, new friends. I'm not going to go back to how I was, but you can't just switch one part on and one part off. So probably, if I'm again going to be nice to myself, I would say 50% I did it. 50% I managed to change. But still, that very rebellious nature, I was still getting into trouble. So many times I ended up in the equivalent of the principal's office, about to get expelled, or kicked out or, suspended from school for a while, just basically rebelling and messing around and causing trouble for people. But I did get some somewhat better friends. I don't remember that any of them at this point were Muslim, because again, if you're looking at influences as to why somebody might change their religion, you start thinking, well, there should be somebody there who said to him. I don't really recall having any Muslim friends. And what Muslim friends I did have, I wasn't aware they were Muslim and they weren't practicing Islam that they would tell me to become Muslim. So that, in my defense, I think that I wasn't aware they were Muslim if I did have any. And if they weren't telling me to become Muslim, or they weren't setting me any great example. They weren't practicing. They were just, like the same as I was a Christian, they were a Muslim. It was a name and a general belief and, celebrating Eid instead of Christmas. But apart from that, it was pretty much the same. So that's where I ended up there. Again, religious education classes continued. And I enjoyed lots of classes. I enjoyed history, I enjoyed lots of things. But I did enjoy religious education. And we ended up with a teacher, and I don't remember if this was in year 9 or year 10, but I ended up with a teacher, I suspect in year 10, who was very different in terms of teaching religion. She was, if this is the right word, and I might be being unfair to her, but she was unconventional in her religious beliefs. She was brought up as a Christian, but identified more with concepts that you would find in religions like Buddhism. So she was, but when you get people who are Buddhist, but they're not really Buddhist. They like some of the ideas of Buddhism, but they don't believe in Buddhism. She was one of those people. She liked some of the ideas to do with, for example, that how you treat other people would affect what happens to you in your future lives or life or whatever. She liked those kind of ideas, but I don't think that she would have identified herself as being Buddhist, nor did she identify herself with being Christian. And again, if anyone were to have been said to have had a major influence on me becoming Muslim, it was probably this woman. And she was not a Muslim, and she didn't like Islam. So the British national curriculum said you have to teach Christianity and one other major world religion. Now, most teachers are not going to be brave and teach Buddhism or Hinduism because it's difficult. There are a lack of resources. There are a lack of places to go and visit. There are, how do you know you're not going to make a massive error and offend somebody in the class? Generally, they're going to go with one of the two safe options, being Judaism or Islam. Because there's material, there's books to read, there's a synagogue around the corner, there's a mosque around the corner, you can take people on visits, and it's the easy option. So as I recall, she decided in this particular term, or she was told by her superiors, I'm not sure, that I have to teach Christianity and Islam. And obviously comparative religion somewhat between the two. You're supposed to, at that age, be able to say, what are the similarities, what are the differences? And she did not like Islam at all. I can guarantee you that. She was not friendly with Islam. She was not offensive. And I'll say also, in fairness to her, she was very factually true, as you would expect from a teacher in the UK teaching a religion. Factually, she was true. She didn't invent something about Islam that wasn't true. Islam believes in human sacrifice. She didn't make up things that weren't true. Having said that, she took every opportunity possible to explain why Islam couldn't work. For example, I remember her asking about the prayers. So she said, who can tell me how many times a day Muslims pray? So a few put their hand up and said, 5 times. She said, okay, 5 times. She probably wrote a big 5 on the board. She went, okay, let me ask the class, how many of you are Muslim? So everybody, 5 hands went up, 4 hands, I don't know, small number. Wasn't a lot, but a few. She said, okay, how many of you pray 5 times a day? You're asking a class of 13, 14-year-old kids. Nobody puts their hand up. Okay, I see. How many of you pray 4 times a day? One person, very sheepishly. Me, yeah? He's like, see, okay, one person. And then after a while, she would go down to that. How many of you pray at all? And, like few more hands, like one hand, two hands went up. This is the problem. She wanted to kind of put across that the idea of praying 5 times a day is great, but actually Muslims don't do it. Like, this is not actually something Muslims really do, and it's not practical to ask people to do. And so she was kind of coming from that point of view. So she had a few times to dig at the Muslims, like she had a few little digs, but she still was factually, and I have to give her credit where credit's due. She was factually very correct. She told the truth. And I remember one of the first things that occurred is I remember talking about the concept of God in Christianity and Islam. Now, one of the things that might have helped the brainwashing process was the fact that she was equally unhappy with Christianity, or almost equally unhappy with Christianity. So it wasn't like Christianity got the really nice treatment and Islam got the negative treatment. She was quite happy to lay into Christianity as well. Less so, but she was still more than happy to have a go at Christianity as well. And that probably influenced me somewhat, because it allowed me to kind of break out of that cycle of believing that everything I was taught was right. So she said, let's talk about the concept of God. So she talked about the concept of God in Islam and the concept of God in Christianity. She talked about belief in the Trinity. Now again, not every single Christian in the world believes in the Trinity. There are Unitarian Christians who believe in one single God that is undivided or has never been divided, or it does not take different forms or whatever. Again, I don't want to speak on behalf of Christianity, but there are Unitarian Christians. But the overwhelming majority of Christians today are Trinitarian Christians. They believe in a Trinity, the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. So she told me about that. And again, this is not me speaking ill of Christianity. I'm going to tell you how I felt only. I felt that the concept of the Trinity for me was very difficult to understand, and it required a lot of patching up. And there are some very ways. I'll tell you, for example, some of the ways that it's explained. Ice, water, and steam, the yolk of an egg, the white of an egg, the shell of an egg, it's all part of the egg, and so on and so forth. But ultimately, you're still left with the concept that God walked on the earth as a man. Doesn't matter whether it's the yolk of the egg or the shell of the egg or whatever, but it's still, the egg still walked around. Ultimately, that I struggled with. And I didn't reject it. I still would have said, if someone had asked me, I still would have said, yeah, I'm Christian, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, yeah, whatever you say. But I did struggle with that concept a little bit. I found it to be difficult. And to be fair, since then, I've actually done a lot of reading to try to understand how Christians explain the Trinity, and I'm a lot better at understanding it than I was then. And I still feel the same way, but I have done, just so that the Christians in the audience know that I'm not, selling them short, that I have, I was a 14-year-old kid. I was not an expert on Christianity. That's unfair to say that here I am sitting as, the world's leading expert on Christianity, and I rejected the Trinity. No, I rejected the Trinity based on an intrinsic feeling inside, not based on some sort of detailed research of what the Trinity was. Yes, I had heard of the concept of ice, water, and steam. It's all H2O, but it has different forms. That was the best explanation I had been given, and to me, it didn't make sense. I wasn't comfortable with it as a belief. When I heard the Islamic belief of the concept of God, I was told Islam believes in one God, completely powerful, knows everything, commands everything, controls everything, gives life, causes death. You only pray to him, you don't pray to anybody else. There aren't any intermediaries. One God only, and that's the end of it. What I like to term now, absolute monotheism. And the reason I use the word absolute is because sometimes Christians and people of other faiths get upset when I say that Islam is the only monotheistic religion. But what I would say is Islam is the only absolutely monotheistic religion, i.e. the only religion where monotheism is taken to the most absolute form. There is no option for even an intermediary or even any sort of means of reaching God other than praying to God directly, one and only. And probably the closest to that is Judaism. But even in Judaism, there are elements of rabbis and their influence, things like the Talmud and their influence upon the laws that God revealed, which even in Islamic sense, Islam sees them as not being truly monotheistic. And Islam sees them as having elements of polytheism in them. And Islam's definition of polytheism is very strong compared to other religions. So those religions, people who follow them, I've met many Hindus who say to me, I'm a monotheist. And I said, look, come on, man, Hinduism is the most polytheistic religion you can find. And they say to me, no, we consider ourselves to be monotheists. But we believe that these are simply representations of God and means to reach God, a single God, and that all of them reflect the same God. So it's not that I'm saying that Islam is the only religion that has one God, but Islam is the only religion that has one God and one God only, full stop, no intermediaries, idols, secondaries, parts of God, different forms of God, different understandings of God, different visions of God. No, one God only, full stop. And when I heard that, I did not want to convert to Islam. I want to make it clear, because some people think, he heard that, that's it. He ran off to become Muslim, ignored all of the way that Muslims treat people and all of the crazy rules and things that shouldn't be there. No, it wasn't like that. When I heard the concept of God in Islam, I went, okay, that makes sense. I like that. It's nice and simple. I like the way that that's simple and easy to understand. I like the way you don't have to explain that to anyone. After you say one God, it doesn't require a paragraph to explain what that one God is or how that one God is. It's just like, look, one God, full stop. I thought, I like that. That's nice. I like it. So I didn't want to become Muslim. I just thought, that's just a proof that truth exists in every place. So now I've gone to a new phase in my life. Yeah, I've gone from religion is a waste of time into a phase of truth exists everywhere. And this is another thing you hear from people. A lot of people in the audience, share these kind of thoughts with us. That, yeah, I appreciate the truth you found in Islam, but you should also appreciate that there are truths that exist in Christianity and Buddhism and Hinduism and people who are not of any faith, and there are truths that exist everywhere. So that's kind of where I got to. Hey, this is just a proof that we didn't get everything right. And that suited my rebellious nature. Like believing that, hey, guess what it is? People in Britain didn't get everything right. Isn't that amazing? So that made me, a bit happy. I kept going back to the class, day by day, class by class, until I started to notice a pattern. And I can't really tell you how long it took, but I started to notice a pattern that everything that I get told about Islam, I would concur that Islam was in accordance with what I believed. I did not, at this point, and I want to be very clear, I did not believe that I believed in Islam. I was more the other way around, that, hey, isn't it funny how Islam agrees with my completely correct view of the world? Because of course I believe that everything I believe is completely correct. And guess what? Most people believe that. Yeah, like, when you put your hand up and say, I'm going to be totally fair, like, it's not true. Ultimately, you believe that what you believe is right. Otherwise, if you didn't have conviction, that's kind of the worst kind of person, like who comes and says, well, I'm a Christian, but I don't really believe in Christianity. And I don't, you want people have conviction. You're a Christian because you believe in Christianity, and that's generally the case. So I believed that what I knew was right. And when Islam agreed with it, like now I would say I agreed with Islam, but now that way I did not think like that. I thought, wow, Islam agrees with me. How lucky for Islam. That's how I felt. And I felt, but it started to dawn on me that it was becoming a habit, that every time I would read something about Islam, I would start to guess, to preempt that, all right, tell me what does Islam say about this? Even when I would be sitting, like someone would be talking about theft, right? And problems and people not being safe, bullying and stuff like that or whatever, like people scaring you, people in school you don't think about big things, but small people taking your lunch money or something, this was something I'll be like, right, what does Islam say? I want to know what Islam says about it. Because it got to the point where I started to think that I seemed to be very much in line in terms of my beliefs with what Islam said. Now this leads into an important question. Did I disagree with Islam in anything? And I think the answer to that is yes and no. Eventually, I found things where Islam didn't agree with me, for sure. For sure, I found things where Islam didn't agree with me. However, I felt and recognized that I could see where Islam was coming from, and I could see that actually maybe Islam might be right and I might be wrong on that one. And that's a new phase for me now. Like, I'm now getting to the point where it's approaching what we would term submission. And it's the word Islam, which means submission and not peace. And Muslims love telling people that Islam means peace. They love that, because it sounds such a good soundbite. Islam means peace. And he said, look, I opened the newspaper last week and I don't see much peace under the column that says Islam. And he will talk about that later. That's my second controversial statement of the night. But honestly, Islam doesn't mean peace. It means submission. And I started to get to the point where I felt myself willing to submit. willing to agree that I might be wrong and Islam might be right. And that for me was a bit scary because I didn't expect to go there, and I expected to find some stuff about Islam that I didn't like and then drop the idea. Not that I had an idea to become a Muslim, but I just would accept that Islam is right about lots of things but wrong about lots of things. But ultimately, I decided that, hey, this is actually worth a bit of research. So I went home. We did have internet. I'm not that old. We had internet at that time. And internet wasn't really very developed, okay? I don't remember what I searched on. It was probably, Alta Vista or, something old like that. And if you remember that, then it shows your age. And I searched about Islam. And I found, guess what? Good things and bad things. But I had an open mind. And I do believe that you have to have, to be fair to any religion or any belief, you have to have an open mind. It's not fair to have a single, very narrow-minded view. So I said, okay, I found people telling me that, for example, Islam mistreats women, for example. I found that on the internet. People said Islam mistreats women. I thought, wow, it's not good. I don't believe in that. I don't believe in mistreating women. I believe that that's a bad thing, and that's immoral and not correct. So I said, okay, let me read what they said. So I read what they said, and instead of having a clouded mind of, look, that's it, my relationship with Islam is finished, I said, okay, let me see what Islam says about it. And I went into it, and I looked at it, and I kind of felt like, actually, if you're being fair to Islam, that's not really a fair statement. If you had said to me, some Muslims mistreat women, I would have said, 100%, I 100% agree. Some Christians do too. So do some atheists, and so do some Hindus, and so do some Buddhists, and so do some Jews, and lots of other religions in some areas. But is it fair to say that Christianity advocates it or Islam advocates it? Islam advocates what is in Islam's scriptures. So they said, yeah, no, there's a difference here. Islam advocates it, like the Bible doesn't, anyway. They said Islam advocates it. Open here, this verse, read it. So I read it. But I read what Muslims say about the verse. What do Muslims say about it? Muslims said, okay, this is the meaning of the verse. This is the proof. This is what the Prophet did. This is what his companions did. Okay, I read it and thought, you know what it is? I actually don't have any great objection to what I read. I don't see, yes, I can see that it might not be what I'm used to in some ways, but I didn't have anything that made me say, hey, this is wrong. This is not from God. I thought, okay, that makes sense. I don't have a problem with that. And that's why sometimes you get a storm in a teacup. Yeah, you get a big storm, but actually it's really tiny. It's actually just inside of a teacup. Like where people will say, for example, Islam says this, And then when you actually look at what Islam says, in all practicality, you could argue about the words used or something like that. But ultimately, and the conclusion of it is just fine. So I was okay. I was like, okay, I'm all right with that. I'm fine. Even things I disagreed with, like I struggled to understand how a person could pray 5 times a day. I struggled with that. Like that's a lot of times to pray in a day. And I was thinking, I'm busy. Like how am I going to do that? But again, I think it's very unfair to say that praying 5 times a day is impractical, because you have, millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of Muslims around the world who pray 5 times a day and don't find it to be impractical. So I think factually it's a bit wrong to say, as the teacher said, that praying 5 times a day is impractical. A lot of people manage it. You can say it's hard, but lots of people manage it just fine. So I was like, okay, I'm not sure I would have chosen to pray 5 times a day, but I can understand the wisdom behind it. I can understand some of the benefits of doing that. And I kind of appreciate having some rules and regulations. And that's another thing that I think, to be fair to the story and to be just to myself. And I began to change about how I felt about rules. In the beginning, I didn't want anyone to tell me anything. And modern interpretations of Christianity, especially Protestant Christianity in modern terms, is very conducive to that, yeah? Like, really, like list a number of things. Okay, the Muslims will understand this. List a number of things that are haram in Christianity. Tell me a list of things that are forbidden. I don't think you can write 10 things down that are, into modern terms, that are forbidden. That you can't do. You can't kill somebody. You can't steal. Certain can't. Some of them, adultery is a bit of a 50-50 one, depending on who you talk to. But there are some basic things. But to be honest, if you look at the 10 commandments of Christianity, at least 3 of them many Christians today don't practice. So for me, Christianity was easy. It was like, look, there are not that many of those things that I have to do. You can be religious and be a good Christian and still drink, have a good time, relax with your friends, not have to pray. Like you're gonna, and still be, you wouldn't be a really good, you wouldn't qualify to be a priest or a pastor in the church, but you would be considered still to be a good, Christian, providing you observed certain beliefs and certain basic practices. Islam was very different. You want the list of things Islam allows and doesn't allow, we wouldn't finish before the dawn prayer starts. Like there's a lot of things that Islam allows and doesn't allow. But for me, suddenly I felt like this worked for me, because I felt that these commands and these prohibitions were not human in origin. I believed, or I started to believe, that they came from God, and that, you know what it is? I wouldn't mind God telling me what to do. I don't want a human being to tell me what to do, particularly, but I wouldn't mind God telling me what to do, especially if it's good for me. We all, human beings are very centered around number one, yeah, like themselves. So I was quite like, look, if it's good for me, all right, I'm willing to submit. And slowly that process went on and on and on. After a while, because I'm conscious of the time, I promised you an hour, and already 48 minutes have gone, so I've got a big stopwatch here, make sure I don't go over the time, inshallah. And also where the room is a little bit warm as well because of the AC, so. But I started to say, right, what makes sense for me now is to seriously think about what I'm going to do with my life, and seriously ask myself, what am I doing here? And do I really believe in Islam? And if so, what am I going to do about it? So I came to the conclusion that I wasn't going to become a Muslim. Still, it's a long story. I came to the conclusion that I was not going to become a Muslim. I was going to delay becoming a Muslim until I reached 18. Because when you reach 18, you suddenly become an adult, apparently. Any of you who reached 18 will realize that that's not entirely true. But we were told that you suddenly become an adult. That's it. Bang. Click of a finger. Clock strikes 12. You're an adult. Okay, I can become a Muslim now. And it'll give me time to think. And I tried it for a while. But I actually felt very much, I felt it to be very, very hard to conceal what I really believed. And I think anyone who's tried doing that, it's incredibly depressing and stressful to be one person, to be a person inside, and be another person on the outside. So ultimately, I gave up on that idea after a while, and finally, I typed a search into the search engine, whatever it was, and it's a search today which is conducted tens of millions of times a month. And if you just check Google statistics on the number of times people search for how do I become a Muslim, the numbers are in the hundreds of millions. However, we presume people type it more than once. So let's just cut that down to a conservative estimate and say that we're looking in the low tens of millions of searches every single month in the English language of how do I become a Muslim? At least I last checked the statistics a few years ago. Who knows? Has it changed? Has it got more or less? Maybe less, who knows? But ultimately, a lot of people every month ask the question, how do I become a Muslim? And of course, I didn't get entirely the right answer back because the internet is not very good for, making sure your sources are entirely reliable, as some of you who may cut and paste for their theses that they write from Wikipedia will soon realize that the internet is not always entirely reliable. And so I was told that to become a Muslim, you have to say the testimony of faith. That's true. Testimony of faith, there's no God that deserves to be worshipped except Allah. Allah being one, just God. I mean, Christians around the world use this word for God. Also Arabic-speaking Christians and Christians in Muslim-majority countries sometimes use the word Allah for God. So it's just God. There's no God except one God, and that Muhammad is the messenger of God. So I thought, okay, I can say that. So I learned it in Arabic. I printed it out, I think. And they told me, this is the wrong bit. Told me you got to have 2 witnesses. And if you don't have 2 witnesses, you can't become a Muslim. So poor guy stuck on a mountain has a moment of revelation, hanging off the cliff, that he wants to become a Muslim. I'm sorry, mate, if you can't get a phone connection right now and tell it for 2 people, you can't become a Muslim. So they told us, and it's ridiculous. Anyone, using their intellect will realize that it couldn't possibly be true, because now God is going to condemn somebody because he couldn't find 2 guys at the time he decided to believe. So, got to find 2 witnesses. They didn't tell me which witnesses, who they should be, men, women, old, young, Muslim, not Muslim. They just told me 2 witnesses. So I came up with a hila. I came up with a diversion, like a way out, a loophole. I came up with a loophole. And the loophole was that I was going to tell my parents, but I wasn't obviously going to tell them I was going to become a Muslim. So I took the piece of paper, I went into the living room, my parents were watching TV. I said, switch TV off for a second. Obviously I got a terrible look at that. What? What's the matter? Is the kitchen on fire? I said, no, I found something I want to read to you. And I read them the testimony of faith. I read them that there's no God that deserves worship except Allah. Muhammad is the messenger of Allah in Arabic. Okay, they don't speak Arabic, in case that wasn't already clear to you. They don't speak Arabic. So they had no idea what it is, but maybe they recognized the word Allah and Muhammad, I don't know. They heard some words, and my mom said, what's this? I said, it's something I found in Arabic. That's all. And I went. So I got my 2 witnesses. Later on, they said, no, it's not valid. They had to be Muslim. Okay, so by then I'd given up. I was just like, look, I did it once. I'm not doing it again. If God doesn't accept, fine. So it actually caused me so many problems. You can't imagine how many problems it caused me after I became Muslim. People kept asking me, who were your 2? This was the number one question. I've heard you become a Muslim. Who were your 2 witnesses? And this became like the normal question I would get asked every time. And I started to come up with really elaborate lies about it. I went to a mosque, and of course lying is not allowed in Islam for the Muslims. Note, double star next to this one. Lying is not allowed. I was young, I didn't understand properly. I probably knew that lying wasn't allowed, but in any case, I felt pressured. And I was like, I went to a mosque. They're like, wow, which mosque? Oh, man, which mosque? I'm not sure the name. Okay, no problem, tell me, where is it? Like, it's in town? Oh, it must have been the university mosque. It must have been. I know the imam. No. No. You know the imam? Oh no, I'm in trouble now. Oh, I don't think it was the imam. Oh, it's okay, I know the guy who's always sat there. He sits there the whole day. He will have definitely seen you come in. I'm like, okay, maybe he forgot. And I'm trying to explain to people, and of course the whole idea was wrong in the first place. So I had become a Muslim. And now I had two major things that I have to tell you about in the next 5 minutes. Number one, what did I do next, and how did I manage with my parents? So what I did next is start to look for some Muslim friends. No, like for the point of the brainwashing topic, and nobody ever said to me, Tim, become a Muslim. Or any words to that effect. Or Tim, what have you thought about Islam? I think I had seen Muslims pray before, I think that I started to find Muslim friends after I decided I was interested in Islam, but before I became Muslim, to be fair. So I think that like that phase of like 6 to 8 weeks where I was really getting into Islam, I did start to find Muslim friends and I did watch them pray and stuff, but they never told me. I mean, I was the furniture, like I was not like supposed to, and they never said to me, oh, watch us pray, isn't that amazing, you should become Muslim. They just like said, oh, it's Ramadan and my dad will kill me if I don't pray. Sincerity, like just for God, yeah. My dad will kill me if I don't pray. And, so can you just sit here for 5 minutes and don't talk? Like, yeah. So they prayed, And yes, that did have an influence on me, no doubt. But that was after I had already began my journey in towards Islam. The worst you can say is that it might have hooked me in a little bit further, but it definitely, nobody ever said to me, nobody ever preached, nobody ever said to me, become a Muslim. And so I was just going through this journey. After a while, my mum said to me, Tim, have you become Muslim? And I froze. I was like, Mum, Muslim? Muslim? Silly. No way. Muslim? No. Me? Muslim? No. Now, I don't know how she found out. And I've never had the guts to ask her. And I give this lecture so many times, and I still, every time I say it, I go, mental note, I must ask my mum. But I've never, ever asked my mum how it was that she knew that I had become a Muslim. I'm not even sure if she even remembers how it was. But she had figured it out. Maybe she heard me saying Allah, maybe she heard too many Arabic words, maybe she saw me leave a page on the computer open, maybe she saw a printout of how to pray in my room or something. I don't know what she saw, but she goes, you become Muslim. I said, no. A few days later, I said, Mom, you know how I told you about, how I said to you I didn't become a Muslim? I did. And she's like, I knew. And I said, and I tried to think, well, what do I say now here? So this is important right now, yeah? So and I was like, yeah, but in Islam you have to be really good to your mum, so that's a good thing for you. And she said, look, we'll talk about this when your dad gets home. And I'll tell you something about my mum and dad. My mum decides everything in the house. My dad doesn't decide anything. My dad he is not allowed to have an opinion. Yeah, ever. My mum decides everything in the house. She'll wait till your dad gets home. So that was not the big scary, oh my God, my dad gets home. It was like, okay, that's all right. She's okay about it. Then my dad will be fine. So they sat me down. Why? And I just told them. I told them why. And at this point, my dad turns around and says, okay, that's what you think about yourself then. If that's what you believe. Okay, I mean, what can I do? And my mum just absolutely started ripping into him, like, your son just became a Muslim and this is the best thing you can say. Is fine? Okay, what did you do? Like, really? That's the best you could come up with? You don't have anything to say other than that? He's like, well, I mean, if you want me to say something. Probably this video will end up with my dad and my dad will say, it wasn't like that, but that's how I remember it, Dad, okay? And that's how my mum and dad are. My mum has got a very strong personality. Maybe I have a personality like my mum. She has a very strong personality, and my dad is very patient and very, very quiet. And so my dad was like, look, that's what he wants to do. And bearing in mind that my dad is somewhat more against Islam, than my mum. Bearing in mind that my mum already came from a fairly strong religious background. Jehovah's Witnesses. She kind of gets the idea you can't drink, you can't celebrate Christmas. She's like, yeah, I used to do that when I was young. It's not like it wasn't like so strange. My dad's more philosophical, and he's more, maybe he's be upset if I said this, maybe he's a little bit more agnostic than my mom. He's a bit more like distant than my mom is. My mom is a bit more like, sort of believe in God and stuff like that. My dad a little bit less so. He's very philosophical, very well read. So he likes philosophy and stuff like that. So my dad wasn't the one to, I wasn't expecting my dad, but my dad was just like, look, he's decided. And my mom, eventually, in a few moments, she also said, look, you never listen to us. You never do what we tell you to do. And so there's no point now in us telling you what to do. You've obviously made this decision yourself. My mom said to me, and the biggest evidence that I can give to you that I wasn't brainwashed is that my mom said words to that effect. It's obvious that you haven't been brainwashed. That's what my mom said. In other words, nobody has come and fed you Islam. You've just done this all by yourself, but she was like, look, you're that kind of kid. You don't listen. You don't do what we tell you. So there's no point in us trying to convince you. All I'm going to say is this. I don't want the house to turn into a war zone. I don't want religious debates in the house. You take your religion, we have ours. We're not going to convert for you. We're not interested in hearing about how wonderful Islam is. You just keep your religion. Don't tell people about it. And my mom advised me, don't tell too many people. Because if you tell too many people, it's going to put pressure on you. Maybe later on you want to change back to become Christian again. Or maybe later on you decide that you don't want, just don't take a burden on yourself in the first few days telling everybody. Don't shout to the world. Alhamdulillah, there was no Facebook at that time. There was no, I couldn't share it with the world. She's like, just keep it to yourself. Do what you want to do. Don't involve us in it. Acceptable or not? I was 14. Now, I would have said not. I'll be honest. To be honest with you guys, if she had said that to me now, I would have said, I'm sorry, Mom. I feel I have a duty to tell you about Islam, and so I can't agree to that. But at the time, I thought it was amazing. I was like, this is the best thing that could have happened to me. Peace in the house. I'm a Muslim. Nobody's angry with me. Nobody hates me. We went through some awkward times. And, events started to happen, negative press started to happen about Islam after I became Muslim. Now, when I became Muslim, still the word terrorism was still somewhat associated with Islam, but it was also still somewhat associated with other religions. It wasn't that long ago that there had been the troubles in Northern Ireland between Catholic and Protestant, and still, if you had said the word terrorism, probably still many people would have said Catholic. Honestly, in England, many people would have associated Catholicism with it. But Islam still had there were still some crazy things going on with Islam. And my mom was like, look, I want to make sure you're not going to do anything stupid. I'm like, no, Mom, I'm totally against doing anything stupid. Don't worry. I'm not going to go start having any crazy beliefs. I'm just a Muslim. I'm not going to do anything silly. She said, okay, as long as you're not going to do anything stupid, you take your religion, you do what you want. Don't tell people about it, and we won't. So fine, brilliant. There's some embarrassing moments because obviously every time the word Islam came on the TV, everyone scrambled for the remote to switch the TV off, me and them, because I didn't want them to talk about it and they didn't want, and you imagine sometimes, look, you know how the media is, yeah? They're talking about a terrible atrocity committed by some crazy guy and they have to show a guy with a beard praying or a lady with her head covered. Look, that's just how it is. Pick headlines in major British newspapers, negative things about Islam. Man kills 5 people. There has to be a picture of a woman with a head covered. It's shocking, but it really is there. There has to be a picture of a woman because that woman had nothing to do with it at all, but she still has to have a picture on the front so that people associate it. So every time this would come on, like some news report about something terrible that somebody who claimed Islam did, somebody's praying or something, everyone runs for the remote control to change their channel. Suddenly, it's like when something a bit, what's the word, inappropriate comes on the TV, some sort of intimacy or something, and everyone reaches for the remote to switch it off, so everyone went for the remote to switch it off. The word Islam came up, the room just went silent. So when I would say, for example, Mom, I'm going to pray, it would be like, you could cut the air with a knife, and not even a sharp knife. Like it was like very, very difficult, awkward. But they were very understanding. Until this day, I have a very good relationship with them. They are not Muslim. But they were very understanding and very, very caring and considerate. And they never gave me a hard time. I don't ever remember after that day having an argument with them about Islam, except on very minor occasions, and not about Islam as a religion, but about some practice. Oh, really? You insist on having your trousers above your ankles. Why do you have to do, like, something like this we would have an argument about. Or like, can you not just please eat the food that we put in front of you for just today? Like, that kind of thing we would have an argument about. But I never, ever did my mum ever question my faith, ask me why. She said, look, I've said to her in the past, like, actually, I can be honest with you. Later on, I got married quite early in my life. I got married when I was, my wife's gonna kill me if I don't get this right. No, I got married in 2004, and I was 20 and just turning 21, just a few months away from 21. And when I told my mum that I was going to get married, honestly, I can honestly tell you her reaction was much worse than when I said I was going to become Muslim. Much worse, really. And that's not exaggeration. That's not for the sake of making you guys laugh. Honestly, that is a genuine comment. She was much, much worse when I told her I was going to get married. She cried. She shouted at me. We had a fight. We had all sorts of problems when I went to get married. My dad wasn't very, thrilled about the idea. And then the only way I could calm my mum down on the marriage thing is say, look, mum, in Islam, you're not allowed to have relationships outside of marriage. And I met this girl, and I don't want to have a relationship outside of marriage. I want to get married. And that's what my religion tells me to do. And have you ever known that I made a decision for the sake of my religion and then I regretted it? My mum went, no. To be honest, I can honestly say that every time you've chosen to do something because of your religion, you've been happy about it and you've been content. So she said, I can understand. We had the same rules when she was in the Jehovah's Witnesses, same rules, no dating, no, whatever. And she said, look, I can understand, but it's a big thing for us. And she wasn't talking to me for a while. And then, slowly, she met my wife to be, and then things were much better. But that was harder for me than, it was easier to tell her, but it was harder, the response was harder to deal with than when I became Muslim. So that's kind of a bit of my story. I have just a couple of minutes to tell you about one tiny little extra bit. What happened after that? And I think as Muslims, we're not very good at this bit. I'll have a little dig at the Muslims as well, that we're not very good at this bit. The bit that we're pretty okay at is telling people about Islam and encouraging people to become Muslim, because we do, like almost every faith, not quite every faith, but like almost every faith in the world, we believe that our faith is the right one and it's the one that people should choose. I think that a Christian would say the same about Christianity. And most people would say the same, maybe with the exception of Judaism to a certain extent. Generally, people would invite people to become a part of their religion. And I think as Muslims, we do an okay job of that. But where we tend to mess up badly is the next bit. What do you do the day that the person comes and says, okay, I'm a Muslim now, I became Muslim. What shall I do now? And he looks and like in shock, like, I don't know what to tell you to do now. Because for them, they've been brought up with Islam from being a baby. Parents had told them how to pray when they were 3, 4, 5 years old. What do you do with someone who comes to you at 20, 25, 30 years old and says, okay, I'm becoming a Muslim now, what shall I do? You have to really know what to advise them to do next. And I struggled a lot with that. I went through a phase of not practicing Islam very much, of being like I was in Christianity, but Muslim. There was a difference, because when I was in that phase as a Muslim, I very strongly believed that Islam was right, whereas I don't think I had that strong belief about Christianity when I was a Christian, like that just belief that no matter what, Christianity was right. And I had the very strong belief that no matter what, Islam was right. But I didn't practice Islam very much at all till I was about 18 or 19 years old. And I found people who could explain Islam to me in a way that I could understand. And sometimes people get negative impressions about Islam because of the way Muslims behave and the way Muslims teach people, the way Muslims share about their faith with people. And I hope I haven't done that today. because it's something I take very seriously. That I want to convey the best possible image of Islam to people, the true image. I don't want to tell you something that, hey, in Islam you can eat what you want and drink what you want and date who you want. No, I don't want to give you a false impression of Islam. But I do want to give you the best accurate impression of Islam I can. And that I struggled with until I met people who could explain to me. And about 18, 19 years old, I started to practice Islam. Now comes the brainwashing part. And I went to Saudi Arabia, okay? So, I love Saudi Arabia, by the way. And I'll say that openly. I love the country. I love what they did. I don't believe everything they do is necessarily true, right? But, I really respect and I have a lot of love for what they did for me to help me to find my religion and understand it properly. And I was given a scholarship to go and study there in Saudi. And that's the brainwashing zone, that's the brainwashing zone right there. That's where you go to get brainwashed. It is. I mean, that's the perception people have. But I want to talk to you about one thing with relation to that. Islam is a balance between submission and critical thinking. Islam does not encourage critical thinking about revelation itself. I.e., Islam does not encourage you to look at a passage in the Quran and say, God says to me, don't drink alcohol. I say, nothing wrong with a glass a week. Islam does not encourage that. However, when it comes to people's opinions about things, a human being other than a prophet, like a person's opinion, I think this passage means this. I think this passage means that. This is where Islam allows a degree of critical thinking. And we were never stopped from that in Saudi. Nobody ever said to me, you should toe the party line, so to speak. You should follow what we tell you the interpretation is. However, they did tell us that based on the very famous passage in the Quran, وَمَا كَانَ لِمُؤْمِنٍ وَلَا مُؤْمِنَةٍ إِذَا قَضَى اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ أَمْرًا أَنْ يَكُونَ لَهُمُ الْخِيَرَةُ مِنْ أَمْرِهِمْ. It's not for a believing man or woman when something is decreed by God or His messenger that you should have any choice after that in the matter. So I was very much like, look, if it's in the Quran, I'm not going to debate it. However, if it's human beings' interpretation of something, then yes, here there is a room for discussion, there's a room for understanding, there's a room for critical thinking, there's a room for saying, hey, what you taught me is wrong. And definitely my experience in Saudi, some of the stuff I was taught, I definitely didn't agree with everything from every teacher. Nobody ever forced that upon me. Was I brainwashed? Probably many times. And the reality is, I think all of us to a certain extent are not brainwashed, but influenced by those things around us. It would be wrong of me to say that I have not been influenced by things around me. But I've been influenced by non-Muslims, been influenced later on by Muslims, after I become Muslim. But I think it's difficult to argue that I was brainwashed into becoming a Muslim, because the only people I had any interaction with before making that decision were all not Muslim and were all not particularly friendly about Islam either. So I think it's fair to say that I wasn't brainwashed into becoming a Muslim. Have I been brainwashed after that? I don't know. Does anyone ever know? I'll leave that one for you guys to decide. That's up to you. I think by now I've gone about 10 minutes over what I said that I would for the actual class, which is okay. It's not too bad. The story is a little long. My next lecture that I'm going to be giving on the topic of depression, yes, which is on Wednesday. Is that right? That one, inshallah, will not be so difficult to go over. This one is a story, and it fits in what it fits in. And we now have time for questions. All right, go easy on me, please. No, questions and answers. I'll let the guys organize, the volunteers, guys, women, whoever's doing the organization, about the questions. All I would ask is, bear in mind that it's very unlikely this entire room is going to agree on what I say or what the questioner says. So just be respectful to everybody, listen to what someone has to say, and then when your time's up. Because sometimes what happens is we could go on all night of, I disagree, I agree, I disagree, I agree. So we'll just try and keep it to a sensible amount. But I will try to listen with an open mind to what you have to say, do my very best to respond with whatever I know. My next disclaimer and last one before I start the questions would be, I am not Islam. I'm a Muslim. This is important, so if I expect the ladies to just give me a second just to mention this, yeah? I am a Muslim, I'm not Islam. I don't represent Islam. Islam doesn't have a pope or a representative. Nobody came to me and stamped me on the forehead and said, you're an official representative of Islam. I have my own opinions. They can be right and they can be wrong. And it may be I might tell you something about Islam that is not representative of Islam. So do your own research. I'll do my best to give you accurate opinions and descriptions, but ultimately nobody represents Islam except for Islamic scripture itself. As for all of us, we're Muslims and hey, we get things right and we get things wrong. So that being said, go for it.